But I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Megan Boone, and I am the Career Community Advisor for Healthcare and Science here in the Career Center. And I'll hand it over to my team to introduce themselves as well.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Jocelyn Martinez. I'm the Assistant Director here for Employer Engagement in the Health Sciences Career Community.
Hi, everyone. My name is Saba, and I'm in the Healthcare and Science Career Community, and I'm the Career Community Ambassador.
Yes, so welcome everyone. The first thing I wanted to do is kind of just do a quick Career Center overview, just of the different services we provide and just some more general resources for you all to access. So I'll go ahead and share my screen with our Career Center website. So this is our Career Center website. Welcome. And I did want to say that just as an overview, we offer career communities. And so kind of like what that means is we have 6 different career communities. We are the Healthcare and Science Career Community, but we have different career communities kind of in the Career Center to narrow down by the various different interests that you may have. It could be related to your major, but the idea is really that you're able to explore many different career pathways before graduating, and that your major doesn't always have to end up being your final career path in the end. So again, as I mentioned, we have the healthcare and science community here, and since it is such a broad industry, we have different subgroupings within healthcare and science. And so you can definitely explore all these different resources that we have built out with different potential internship opportunities as well as post-grad opportunities. And so, yeah, that's all on our Career Center website. I also did want to mention that we have on our Career Center website our career library, and we have a ton of different resources as well on here and handouts. So basically any career related topic that you wanted to dive more into, we have a handout on it. So anywhere from writing your resume or cover letter to some interviewing, job search tips, networking, all that good stuff. Definitely explore the different resources we have on our career library. And these are just handouts that you can utilize. But then within each career community, we have an advisor and an ambassador, and we do 30-minute advising appointments. And so within that, you can meet with one of us individually, so one-on-one, and have a career-related conversation. So anything from exploring different career pathways after graduation, finding a job or internship while you're still in school, writing your resume or cover letter, any conversation that you'd like to have, we are definitely available to have that. So to schedule an appointment, you'll do that on Handshake. And so this is the platform we use for job searching, internship searching, likely how you registered for this event, but also you can utilize scheduling an appointment within this. So if you just go to our Career Center page here, and then you can schedule an appointment this way, and it'll take you through several different prompts of what type of career community. So if you're looking to meet with one of us in the healthcare and science community, you can click this, or you can explore, again, any of the other career communities as well, and have those 30-minute conversations with one of us. We do offer in-person advising as well as virtual. So whatever works best for you. And then the last resource that I wanted to dive into is our Alumni Sharing Knowledge Network. So this is actually how we found and connected with Gabby, who is our speaker today. So what this is a platform for alumni to connect and mentor students. So it is a ton of different alumni that have different, they have taken different career pathways in many different areas, and they are opting to be mentors for all of you. So you can connect with them that way. You can kind of search by like keyword or any industry that you're looking to specifically get into. And then kind of, if you're familiar with LinkedIn, you can connect with them and then message them individually to either set up a time to have those conversations with them, kind of figure out like what they did at their time at DePaul, what they're doing now. And yeah, that is kind of an overview on the Career Center, just some of the resources that we have. We have tons more, so definitely would encourage you to check out those resources and schedule an advising appointment if you want to continue that conversation. But I did want to open it up to Gabby, who is our speaker today, and kind of hear her story on her pathway to becoming a genetic counseling assistant. So Gabby, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Just as a quick note too, if any of this ends up sounding interesting to you too, feel free to connect with me on that Ask Network as well. I've had students reach out and ask for informational interviews and stuff like that. So I'm always happy to share more about my experience. I think I have kind of a longer pathway to where I'm at. So sometimes there's more specific questions about pieces. So if anything doesn't get addressed or you just are interested in maintaining the connection, feel free to reach out. So my name is Gabby. I am currently a second-year student in the Masters of Science in Genetic Counseling program at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I'm also working for Mayo Clinic as a genetic counseling assistant. So right now I'm part-time, but I was working there for about 2.5 years full-time. May go back there to work for a little bit before switching jobs. We'll see. We're getting close to the job application process here pretty soon. So we'll see how that goes. But essentially, when I was at DePaul, so I'm originally from Iowa City, ended up at DePaul kind of through a random series of events, and really, really enjoyed being able to take advantage of being in the city. So I moved to DePaul. I started in 2012 and graduated in 2016. And I was a psychology and Arabic studies double major. There are a lot of kind of iterations of what that looked like throughout my time, but essentially it ended up kind of orienting my path towards research. So I was really interested in psychology research, considering like peace, justice, and conflict studies research, kind of throughout my time at DePaul, I did a lot of stuff that was research oriented, a lot of stuff that was psychology oriented. So kind of on that track, I was a stats tutor, so for the psychology department. So I would work with students on statistics questions. I was a psych peer mentor for a bit there towards the end. Outside of that, I also was a Chicago quarter mentor for 3 years. So that was a great experience. My senior year, I got to help out with the psychology of Chicago parks, which was a super fun class. We got to see a lot of Chicago that way. But that was a really great experience. The teaching experience was awesome. I also worked at the Ray. I worked a bunch of different positions, but ended up as a building manager. And so that was really great experience as well. During my time, I was also in the honors program. So took a couple of classes that actually ended up orienting me towards this particular career. So one of them was with, I don't know if he's still there, but Professor Halstead, who is a Catholic priest, and he taught a lot about like ethical worldviews and perspectives. So like really trying to understand other people's worldviews and where they're coming from and how they perceive the world, how they develop their own value system, stuff like that. And then I also took a class in the biochem department with, oh gosh, I don't remember who it was, Dr. Marish, I think, who it was like a genetics, like a DNA and disease class. It was made for non-majors, but we did a lot of genetic stuff, and it really like got me interested in the ethical issues surrounding genetics. So we watched like a debate on genetically modifying babies was the like debate title. It was really about like how far do we go and whether or not any of these things should be allowed and what purposes for that and what are the concerns. So there are lots of little things kind of throughout my DePaul process. I also was involved in the DUOs program. I should have mentioned that too. So for research, I was in the social psychology research lab. I worked on several projects. I did the Duos research grant for 2 years and did some presentations. And then through that, I ended up finding, not necessarily through the lab, but like on my own, I ended up finding an internship, and probably having my experience helped me get an internship at NYU as a like research assistant for the summer, where I was in the SPAM lab. So it's like the social perception and motivation lab. I got paid good money to live in New York City for a couple of months and did some very interesting projects on physiological responses to anxiety and anxiety contagion, some really interesting stuff with that. And then I got to about the last, I would say, 2 quarters of school, and realized that research was not going to be for me. And there are a variety of reasons for that. I think research is a great career. I've really enjoyed having that aspect as a part of my career, and I will continue to probably enjoy having opportunities to be involved in research. But I think some of my big considerations were just like, what do I want my career to look like? What do I want my day-to-day to look like? What do I want my hours to look like? What do I want my vacations to look like? So some of those kind of more practical considerations really came in for me, realizing that a lot of professors were doing a lot of work outside of work hours, spending time on vacation reading manuscripts, and some people really enjoy that. That was not going to be for me. And so I really started thinking about what my alternatives were. I took a bunch of career surveys. I'm pretty sure I sat down with the career center, which was very different. This is beautiful. Whatever you guys have now is lovely. It wasn't quite so specific when I was there. It's changed a lot. So it is really nice. I sat down with people and talked to them, and they helped me kind of work through some of my concerns about taking gap years and considering going back to school and all of those pieces. And at some point, I saw Reddit Ask Me Anything that was with a bunch of genetic counselors who were talking about their experiences and what their job looks like. So I guess this is probably a good point where I can talk about that. I don't know how familiar everyone is with genetic counseling, but essentially I kind of think of a lot of genetic counselors. So they usually technically work in kind of 2 main different realms with like other kind of mixed in roles here and there. But you're either looking at clinics, so usually a hospital setting or clinic setting, or maybe even a telehealth setting, or a commercial lab. So you're reviewing test results. Some genetic counselors do work for big like direct to consumer testing companies like 23andMe, but a lot of them also work for places like Mayo Clinic. So I worked in the lab at Mayo Clinic, not in the clinical side, reviewing test orders, making sure that appropriate genetic testing was ordered, and making sure that the indications were correct and all the information was as it should be, and also like re-reviewing genetic variants that came up and looking for new information. So there's kind of that side. And then the clinical side, I really think of genetic counselors as sort of a guide, or I don't know what, I feel like there's been better ways of describing it, but guiding people through the process of genetic testing and making decisions about genetic testing. So being an expert on the ethical issues that go along with genetic testing, or the legal repercussions of testing or not testing, considering what those results might mean for somebody and their family, helping them work through reproductive decisions, all of those kinds of different things, following up with them on management, making sure that they get letters if they need them for school accommodations and things like that. So that's really what I was looking at then. And since genetics is kind of a hard field, a lot of it is education. So when I really started thinking back to like all of my experiences at DePaul, I loved having those opportunities to do the tutoring and the teaching through, stats tutoring and working as a Chicago quarter mentor. And I really enjoyed having mentorship opportunities as well through being several different positions at the Ray. I was always training somebody. So having those opportunities because genetic counselors very often are mentoring other trainees. And then also just the science. So I really liked my hard science classes. I didn't take a ton of them, but I enjoyed them when I took them. And so I really took that to heart and thought about it and enjoyed my genetics class, both the science piece and the more ethical considerations. And then I did enjoy those ethical considerations. I think it's a tough area where things are constantly changing. There's a lot of questions about ethical things within healthcare in general, but genetics is definitely an area where that comes up a lot. So I enjoy thinking about those questions and talking about those questions. So as I kind of started putting these pieces together, the education piece, the wanting to be a lifelong learner is a huge piece of it too with genetics. So maybe not wanting to be in school forever, but still wanting to have, incentive to keep learning and educating myself. So that's kind of how I ended up starting to orient my career towards that. Was really just career. I think I did the ONET one was one of the big ones where I finally was like, okay, this makes sense. And I don't remember what it's called now. It's got a new title, but it's a free career survey. And I think it can take into account like your interest in doing additional education and like lots of different interests. It's kind of like the interest finder type of thing. So I did that, and genetic counselor just ended up like very high on that for me. And I was like, okay, like I've read about what people do in this career. This feels very true to what I want to do. So I went back to school at the University of Iowa. I moved home, did a couple of years of like my general science classes. So took biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, biochem, genetics, that kind of stuff. And then ended up being pretty tired. I was working multiple jobs in the neurology research lab with mice, doing some like neurogenetic stuff, and I worked at a crisis center as a crisis counselor overnight on occasion. Did some volunteering there as well when I wasn't working there. And then I also tutored a student who has autism. So was working a lot of different things, just trying stuff basically, and trying to make sure that this was what I was interested in. During that time, I did spend a lot of time seeking out opportunities for like open houses for programs. The University of Iowa pushes genetic counseling pretty hard, even though they don't have a program right now. So it's a lot of, they do like a really great, and I think they offer virtually like day on applying to grad schools where you can talk to a bunch of different genetic counselors about their experiences applying to grad school and all of that piece. They do like a career day in human genetics too. So I went to that and was like, none of these are interesting except for being a genetic counselor. So again, confirmation that I was like in the right place. And then I got to do a little bit of shadowing. So obviously pre-pandemic, now it's a little bit harder. Some places are still not taking people to shadow, but there's still really good opportunities in terms of like informational interviews and all of those things. And then I was tired, like all of that stuff was a lot. So I decided to find a job. I ended up at Mayo Clinic. So I applied to as many genetic counseling assistant positions as I could find all across the country. I also applied to some other like tangentially related jobs, but I was really just aiming for something that had full-time benefits and would give me some time to like take a breath before going back to school after being in school essentially for 6.5 years. So I ended up as a genetic counseling assistant, and it was a very, very, very valuable experience. I was one of two that were hired to be the first genetic counseling assistants in the lab at Mayo. I worked with a bunch of different genetic counselors in a bunch of different areas. So prenatal, hereditary cancer, personalized genomics, whole exome sequencing. So I was getting a lot of different exposure to a lot of different areas of genetics. I got to learn a lot about conditions. I got to learn a lot about testing and how that works for a commercial lab. both on the financial side, so like some stuff with prior authorization and insurance, which is the thing that no genetic counselor likes at all. It's the worst part of our job, in my humble opinion, but probably most of their opinions, to be honest. But it was good experience to learn that. Genetic counseling is a match program, so kind of like residency. I don't know how familiar everybody is, but just for people who aren't, kind of like residency, where you will apply to a bunch of different programs, get interviews some places, and then rank your top choices, and then they also independently rank their top choices based on the interviewees, and then they match you to the highest like spot that's available for you. So I ended up at the University of University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and this program currently does not allow like some clinical observations and stuff in the first year, and it's mostly didactic work, so working in the classroom on just learning stuff. And then your second year is really when you start rotations. So this summer I did a rotation in cancer genetic counseling, and then I just finished up a pediatric rotation, and then my next rotation will be in prenatal genetic counseling. But just as like another reference point, I am also working on my capstone research, which is on adoption of infants with like prenatally diagnosed genetic conditions or birth defects. And I'm also we get to have one non-clinical rotation. So my fourth rotation is a genetic counselors in research rotation, where I'm going to be working closely with a genetic counselor virtually on some research projects. I'm also helping out with the Undiagnosed Disease Network here at Duke. So that's one of the universities here in North Carolina. They have basically a program where they work with families who have a child with an undiagnosed possibly genetic condition. A lot of them are pretty medically complex, and try and find an answer. So a lot of these kiddos have been on diagnostic odysseys that go on for years. And so I'm working on some case reports with them in terms of doing like literature review stuff, helping them write those case reports. So my research background is not going to waste. I'm still using it. It just doesn't look quite the same as what I expected. So that was a lot of information. My path involves a lot of random stuff. So I'm happy to answer whatever questions people might have, whether that's about what applying for jobs is like, what applying for genetic counseling assistant positions looks like, what things I felt like most helped me. Anything that you have questions about, I'm more than happy to answer.
Hi. I don't know if we're doing like a raise your hand system or something. So I'm currently in the process of applying for genetic assistant grad school programs.
Okay.
One of the things that I've seen are kind of like boot camp workshop type things that are like 10-week certification programs for genetic counseling assistants. I was wondering if you had any like input on those, and do you think it's a good thing to do prior to grad school? What's your knowledge of them?
So I don't have a ton of knowledge on them. I don't want to speak for everyone on it, and I haven't looked. I know that Johns Hopkins maybe had one. There was like another one that they were considering at Wisconsin, maybe. I can't remember what the whole thing with that is. I had one genetics class and one like sort of genetics class basically before I ended up in my genetic counseling assistant position. Personally, and like again, this is my own opinion, I think that if you have the finances and don't mind doing that, it's fine. A lot of people are going to be getting these positions without any of that training because it's just not accessible to most people to do those kinds of trainings. They're very pricey sometimes. And so it's just not, I think if that's available to you and something you're really interested in, it's not going to be like not valuable experience, but I don't think it's necessary to get those positions. They are competitive. So I'm sure like you have some amount of awareness of that whole deal. Like they are very competitive positions because people have, because it's a competitive, I mean, to be honest, it's a competitive field. So there's a lot of people who are interested in going on to grad school in genetic counseling and really see it as a stepping stone. So there's a lot of turnover, but also a lot of competition. There's just, I mean, realistically, there's just not enough openings in schools to accommodate the number of qualified applicants. So I think there's kind of this push to try and make yourself stand out as much as possible or have as much experience as possible. And again, like I think my experience was great. I don't necessarily think that it is all that got me into grad school for sure. Like there was a lot of other stuff that probably weighed more heavily. I don't think I got very many questions about my experience at Mayo in any of my interviews, but I would say that generally there's kind of mixed feelings within the profession about the idea of having a training program for that because it does become cost prohibitive for a lot of people. And there's already kind of a question about the issues of diversity within this field because it is heavily dominated by white cisgendered women. So, I mean, again, like it's not going to be bad experience if you have the flexibility, go for it and are really interested in it. It might be valuable if you are particularly thinking about going into or aiming for a genetic counseling assistant position as a career path, which is absolutely doable as well. One of the people I think currently at Mayo is really not thinking of it as a stepping stone and is really just looking to stay as a genetic counseling assistant permanently. So I think it kind of depends on what you're using it for. And the other thing is, I would personally also consider what your goals are and what they say basically about getting a job afterwards, because I would hate to recommend something that was like 10 weeks, cost couple $1,000s or whatever it's going to be, and then it be just like a kind of unfortunately a crapshoot of whether or not you'll get a genetic counseling assistant job, especially like moving wise. Like some people don't have the flexibility to move around. So I think it heavily depends on what you would like to be doing with that and whether or not you would feel like you wasted time and money on it if you do not secure a genetic counseling assistant position because they are so competitive, which doesn't mean that there's not other opportunities that you can probably use those skills for. The other thing is that every genetic counseling assistant position is going to be different. So I know some people who were genetic counseling assistants at other labs and did wildly different things than I did. So it kind of depends on what that training looks like as well. I don't know what the curriculum looks like, but in terms of test review and everything else, different labs are going to have different ways of looking at that. So I think probably it would matter depending on whether or not the focus is more on giving you like genetic counseling education in terms of like, I don't know, different types of testing and those testing platforms and stuff that you may not have gotten in school versus maybe being a path to getting a little bit more basic genetics for somebody who didn't do a biology degree or something similar like that. That's a very long answer to a very simple question, so I apologize. It's kind of a debate, I think, right now in the community because of the accessibility issue and because so many people have been successful genetic counseling assistants with no training. So I don't know. But you can take everything I say with a grain of salt, because again, I'm not the person who's interviewing genetic counseling assistants. I don't think I saw anyone with that background when we were interviewing people at Mayo. So I don't know how it would have been perceived. I can't imagine it would be a strike against anyone, but I don't necessarily think it would automatically make me say that this person's going to be a better genetic counseling assistant than anybody else.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you were at Iowa, did you like get a degree in something else with all those classes, or was that just for your like personal benefit?
So not my personal benefit. Well, yes, personal benefit. I didn't get a degree. So genetic counseling programs typically have a list. Each of them will have a different list, it's frustrating, of prerequisites. So typically that includes like basic biology and chemistry. So like, I don't know, biology 1, 2, and principles of chemistry, or whatever they're called elsewhere. So it's usually typically like 4 classes of those. Some places do require organic chemistry. Most universities will require organic chemistry as a prerequisite to biochemistry, and almost every single program is going to require biochemistry. So I kind of just assume that Orgo 1 is probably also going to be a prerequisite. Genetics, like a general genetics class, some places have more strict requirements on what that looks like than others. So I know for a fact, like when I applied 2 years ago, Michigan had a requirement for human genetics if your university offered that. Mine didn't. I don't think I even said anything about it and still got an interview. So I don't know. Always good to ask if you have questions about the prerequisites. Some places also require like a psychology class. A lot of places require a basic level statistics class, so like biostats, or like I took a couple of psychology stats classes and that was sufficient. Some places will also want like a technical writing class. Some places will want like cell bio or some other upper level. Some places do want like a molecular biology or a molecular genetics class. So definitely, if there are places that you're interested in going, look at what their prerequisites are, so that if this is a career path you are interested in, you can make sure that you fulfill the prerequisites for each of the programs that you're applying to, because they will differ between schools. So 8 of my classes, so bio, chemistry, orgo, like biochem and genetics, were really just to like my basic level, needed to have these in order to get into school. Prerequisites, I did the bare minimum basically, because I was not outside of whatever I got from my psychology degree. But I also took an anthropology class that was about genetics too, just because I was interested and had a little flexibility my last semester there. So I think I would say I didn't get a full degree. I just took those classes. I kind of touted as my unofficial post-bac basically. I mean, I didn't have to like apply to the University of Iowa. I like basically just worked through whatever the non-degree seeking student situation was, which was helpful because I was still considered a student there, which is how I got my lab job. So that was nice. But I would say too, like if you're thinking about classes, look at those prerequisites and also consider things that you just enjoy, because you get to be in college for 4 years. Grad school, I don't know, I got 1 elective. A lot of programs don't offer electives at all, and my 1 elective had to be used for something that was at least mostly related to what I'm doing, which you can make an argument for a lot of things, but I ended up taking like a public health disparities class. So if there are things that you're interested in, definitely like go for those now, when you can, if you have the flexibility. I took, what was it? I don't know, the wine class. I can't remember what it's actually called, but I took that class. That was great. Super fun at DePaul. I took a cognitive neuroscience class because I was interested. I took some stats classes because I'm a nerd and I liked those. So definitely use that stuff to your advantage. I feel like you can learn something, I don't know, related pretty much no matter what. So, but yeah, I did not get a second degree. That would have been hard. What else can I answer for you all?
How heavily do you think like the research experience, the teaching experience, and the counseling experience influenced your ability to get into these schools? I've heard from a couple people that like the crisis counselor thing is a really big go-to when trying to get that experience in the field.
Yes. So, this will be school dependent. Research is it's varied for people. A lot of people don't have research experience. A lot of people do just because they were in, science majors where it just made sense to take a research assistant position during school, or was what was available after graduation. So, there tends to be a lot of people with some research experience, but I don't necessarily know how heavily that weighed on my particular application at this particular school. I did have a good connection with the faculty member who is involved in our capstone stuff. So, and we did talk a lot about research. Well, we talked a little bit about research. I think we talked about a lot of other stuff though too. So I don't know how much like it was just that piece versus us just talking about problems in the field and ethical issues and how to, approach diversity in the field and stuff like that. So research is kind of a hard one. It really depends on the program. As far as the counseling piece, that's going to be a big piece probably at every single program. So if you look at the requirements for, I can't remember 100% for UNCG, I want to say they may have both an advocacy and a counseling requirement. In which case I also did some training to be a like rape crisis counselor when I was in Minnesota working for Mayo, and I did that because I was interested, but then ended up not being able to be very involved because of the pandemic. So I think it counts. Who knows? But there are requirements at different schools. That requirement looks different, but you are probably, if you are interested in this field and getting into a genetic counseling program, you're going to have to find some sort of counseling / advocacy experience. And I would say, like, personally, the way that I went about that was that Iowa City has a crisis center there. And so it was pretty easy for me to end up volunteering there. And then just through the volunteer training, they were hiring somebody and I had the availability on the weekends to work overnight. So I ended up doing that. And so there might be like local places that have something like that. So a lot of people do like crisis text line is kind of the go-to for a lot of people. That is not what I worked on. I worked for the Johnson County Crisis Center. So there might be local places that are an option. Some people, I think there's like a Runaway, I think, crisis line. There's a couple of other national crisis lines that you can find like volunteer positions with. Some of them might also have work positions. Some people do like rape victim advocacy training, which does oftentimes also involve a crisis counseling component to it. And I mean, just speaking from my personal experience, I don't know that every single person has that experience. Some people may have like worked with students with disabilities and like, I know somebody who did like equestrian therapy with children who had disabilities, like working with horses and stuff. So I think it kind of looks different for everybody, but there is going to be some component of that. And from my personal experience, having that background was extremely helpful to me now as I'm actually working with patients. I realize like having that training and like how to communicate empathy or being able to kind of diffuse difficult situations, like there are reasons why they want that as a component of your application. And I think people get really stressed about that piece sometimes because there can be waits for things. Trevor Project's another big one if you are involved in the LGBTQ community. There can be waits for those things. So I would say generally, if this is something that's interesting, like I would investigate what's available. And I think it's informative too of like whether or not you're actually going to like that at all. Like just because you don't like crisis text line doesn't necessarily mean you won't like genetic counseling. But I think if the idea of having to sit with somebody in really hard conversations makes you really uncomfortable, this might be a more challenging career path for you, because no matter what, everyone has to do the clinical training. Everybody's required to have clinical cases. So you can't just orient towards the lab and not do any of that in your training. Some labs also like to see people who had the clinical experience before coming to the lab. So I think it's good experience just from that perspective as well, because you are sometimes talking to people about really hard stuff. Sometimes you're telling a parent that their newborn baby has a condition that may affect their development, and they're, running through all the possible scenarios in their head and freaking out basically. That you have to be able to kind of work through that. Crisis counseling will help with that. So it can be very beneficial. The education piece, I think again, like I wasn't on my own admissions committee, who knows, but I think that helped me, at least from my perspective, in terms of just understanding what it is to do education, like what is the goal, what does this look like? And I think generally, like, it's hard. It's a competitive field. There's a lot of people with a lot of really cool experiences. Doesn't mean, I would say definitely try your best not to compare yourself to everybody else, because everybody has their own unique experiences. And I mentioned this to Megan when we were talking about this, but something I talk about a whole lot is transferable skills and, transferable experience basically. So some people will get into genetic counseling school with like very little genetic specific experience, but will have some like weird random teaching experience or something else that makes them stand out and unique. But when it comes down to it, the biggest thing is about how you're communicating what those experiences are and what they meant to you. So like, what did you actually get out of it? So when I could sit there and like list my tasks that I did as a building manager, or I can talk about how much I valued having opportunities to mentor students in different positions. I can talk about what kinds of hard situations I experienced while I was there and how I handled them well or didn't handle them well and what I learned from that. And the same goes for like my teaching experiences, right? So I can talk about, like an attempt at teaching that flopped completely, or I can talk about, what it was like to create lesson plans. Now I create agendas for appointments, which are very similar in terms of like, what are the educational components I need to include? What visual aids do I need to have for my patients? That kind of stuff. So I think probably all of my experiences had some factor in it, but I think what has been very helpful for me over time in applying for jobs and applying for grad school is really thinking about, what it is about those experiences that I can apply. And sometimes being very creative about that can be very valuable. I know there's a Discord server for a lot of prospective genetic counseling students. It's open. If people are interested, and they can always message me on Ask, and I'll give you the link if you're not connected. but someone has talked about how they got a lot of good feedback about talking about their bartending experience in their genetic counseling interviews. And so it's, I would look again at the programs you're interested in and see what the recommended experiences are. If you're not quite sure, go ahead and email whoever it tells you to email, or email the program director if it gives their email, and see what they say. So I think that's the best. And honestly too, I know that you said that you're interested in genetic counseling assistant positions, and I think those are great. And again, they're competitive. Sometimes you might have to move if that's something that you're not interested in. They might be limited in the area. Sometimes it's just who you know, which is sucky, but just how it works. And sometimes you may end up with that job, and that would be great. But it's absolutely not a requirement to be a genetic counseling assistant to go into this career. So there's lots of other things. And I think there's always kind of this feeling of, I need to have as much experience in this field as possible. And exposure is important. Do those informational interviews, go to those open houses, go to those events talking about, different, how to apply to grad school or different careers in genetics. If you have opportunities to attend webinars or whatever else, like all of that stuff is going to be beneficial and helpful to communicate. But when it comes down to it, like your unique experiences and the things that you enjoy will also be beneficial too, and may set you apart. So it's come up a couple of times with people saying, like, I have this opportunity to do 12 hours a week at in a genetic counseling clinic, but it's unpaid, and I need to fund my apartment. So should I, take out loans to do this, or, whatever else, instead of taking this full-time research assistant position, doing stuff with children who have a non-genetic condition or whatever else. And so people are like, no, just take the job that's paid, do what you need to do for you. Because when it comes down to it, I could learn lots of the skills that I'm learning in my genetic counseling assistant position anywhere in a different way that may not have to do with genetic conditions or genetic testing, and it would still be valuable experience. So no matter what your experience is or what you have available, there are ways to look for those things that will, be able to communicate. But again, when I also look at the websites and see what they recommend, and then just see where you have to check the boxes off, which is frustrating, but there's creative ways to do that. And you can always ask if an experience that you've had might fulfill that. It also doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have 5 years of that experience, right? You could volunteer a couple of times for something and still have that experience.
I think we'll have time for one more question if anyone has one. Well, I actually have a question, Gabby. So
Yes.
I know it's kind of a hard question to answer, but how do you see what you're doing now, what you've done with the Mayo Clinic fitting into post-grad when you graduate, and kind of that end goal?
Absolutely. Well, so I've started looking at jobs. And it's interesting because I think with working at Mayo Clinic and being in the lab, I don't know if there's going to be any jobs open, but it may be a potential for me to move into a genetic counseling job there, which I would have a leg up because I'm an internal hire. I'm familiar with all the software and have worked with these genetic counselors for almost 4 years now. So that may be an option for me to do that. But on the converse side, working in the lab has made me realize I really don't want to work in the lab personally. I may do it for flexibility reasons. It's remote work, so that's great. But realistically, I really like the clinic. So I think that's been like the clinical experience has been really enjoyable for me comparatively. So I think also there's kind of the learning, all experiences you have, you may get transferable skills from, but also be observant of like what you do and don't like about things. Like look at the people who are above you, see if you like think their job looks interesting, if your goal is to like move up. So like, do you want to do your manager's job? Like, does that seem interesting to you at all? Are you liking your hours? Like, I knew that at working overnights, I was like, there's no way I am going to med school. I cannot do, like, if I have to be on call at any point, I will not function. So I need like a 9-to-5 job. So I think like there's been that aspect of just kind of figuring out what I do and don't like. I think a lot of other things, like just in terms of like the education and everything else, again, like I've really enjoyed that experience. I like being one-on-one with people. I like being in person. So I'll probably aim for a clinical position. In terms of like other stuff, I am also looking into like the possibility of doing some like additional ethics training. I don't want to go back to school, but like there's some options for things like ethics fellowships where you train to be on like committees to talk about ethical issues that come up in clinical settings and hospitals. So I'm kind of interested in that piece. And I, again, like got a lot of that from a lot of the conversations that I had while I was in undergrad at DePaul. But also like, I really hope that at some point I get to, you know, supervise other genetic counseling students. So we usually have we have to have supervisors to do our clinical rotations. And so I love that mentorship, that teaching opportunity, being able to give feedback, having those kinds of conversations is really important. And like, I don't know, hopefully I'll get to also be guest speaker on something at some point at somebody's program. So there's kind of all those little pieces of like, just because I do those things in clinic doesn't also mean that I can't find other opportunities to do them outside of that. I don't know what research will look like for me. Research time-wise sometimes doesn't always fit into your schedule really well, but this summer I was at a clinic where they have 3 patient slots in the morning, and then their entire afternoon is devoted towards admin work or research. So they have some specific time cut out for research specifically with their health system. So I think that's another big piece where I may be interested in a job that looks like that, where it's, you know, maybe half clinical, half research or something similar. So a lot of those experiences probably speak to any of those things. Who knows where I'll end up? I don't know. I want to move back to Chicago, so it may just be that I take whatever I can get that's around the area. But I think it's given me a lot more flexibility, and it's given me a good idea of like what I do or do not want in a workplace and what I do or do not want in a job. So I think when it comes down to it, like that's been the most important thing that I've taken away from all of it is like, yes, I have all these skills. Yes, I have these things I really enjoy. I may or may not get to incorporate all of those things into what my career looks like long-term, just based on like timing and what's available and all of those things. But ultimately, like I do know like where kind of my priorities are, where my values are, and what I ultimately like what's the bare minimum of what I need out of a job, and that sort of thing has been probably the most valuable part of all of that.